Welcome back, everyone. I'm Justin Paperny here with my good friend and partner, Michael Santos. Michael, I want to talk about, we hear extraordinary and compelling a lot. I've been to some sentencing hearings where a defendant's trying to tell the judge how great they've been. I've been compliant, I'm working. And the judge, like a case manager, would argue, well, that's required. That isn't extraordinary. I guess people would define extraordinary and compelling in different ways. As someone who served a long time in prison, can you offer some insights from your perspective on what does extraordinary and compelling really look like?
Well, first thing I would recommend to that person who you said the judge said, I don't confine you to be extraordinary, compelling. I would look at that as an opportunity, because the individual at that point has to say, okay, now I know how the system sees me. They're only viewing me as a criminal. The system, stakeholders in the system are only viewing me as somebody who broke the law and is on his way to prison. And they have certain levels of expectation of what that person is supposed to do. To be extraordinary and compelling, you have to go well beyond that. And the only person that can define what extraordinary and compelling is the individual. For example, I'll just turn it on you. When you were sentenced to prison, what did you think was the best outcome for you at that earliest stage? What's the best outcome? Your judge just sentenced you to 18 months.
Outcome for the rest of my life?
I don't know. What were you thinking about? Some people think about the rest of their life. Some people want to bury their head in the hill and say, oh my God, I'm dead for 18 months. What did you think?
My initial thought after my lawyer says, no matter what you do, you'll be fine. You're going to get 6 months in the halfway house and prison will be boring. You'll probably learn just to never talk about it. You'll move on. You have an education and you'll find your way, somehow. And those were my only thoughts. I obsessed over, okay, 6 months, halfway house, which turned out not to be true. But what does that really mean? And then I was somewhat delusional, presuming I would return to the career I had led. That turned out, unfortunately, not to happen. And then it was, will I ever work again? Having earned a decent income, part of me regretted having made so much money for a while because you have a comparison, So I didn't envision a real productive future moving forward. And I felt that way in the early days in prison, where I just said, maybe I'll just exercise and get in better shape and I'm going to go home and maybe somebody will hire me.
So that's not starting by defining success. Yeah. Okay.
I couldn't even comprehend what success was. I want to get through it somehow, some way and move on.
And that's not the path that leads anybody to success, right? There's a great analogy from the book, Alice in Wonderland, where there's this Cheshire cat that says, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Okay, because you're just meandering through. And that's what happens to many people who go to prison, is they just meander through. They think that if I'm not going to get in trouble, okay, all I'm going to do is I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm not going to get any disciplinary infractions. I'm going to do my time, and then I'm going to go home. Well, there's nothing extraordinary about that. But if you thought about the best possible outcome, what does it look like and at what stages? If you say, I want to get the highest level of home confinement or the earliest possible transition out of prison, well, does that differentiate you from anybody else that's in there? No. You want to be the person that's done a lot more. And I can't tell you what that looks like. I can only talk about what I did. But every individual needs to figure out, how am I going to overcome this judge who doesn't think I've done anything? Because anybody going into the system at some point is going to want to get relief at various stages. He's going to want to get out of prison at the soonest possible time. That's administrative. He's going to want to get early termination of supervised release. That's judicial. He may want to get executive clemency. That's executive branch of government. He may want to position himself for employment or a career path, and he's got this reputational damage. All of these factors or collateral consequences of a criminal conviction, we need to think about. And then we need to think about, what can I do to get there?
So I'm driven, and I know a lot of people in our community are driven by fear. And after I was in prison for several months, I would go into your cubicle and I'd say, so-and-so is really scared to go home, or he just had a terrible visit with his wife because she's asking him, how are you going to sustain the family or pay restitution? Guys back then were turning down the halfway house. They didn't want to go to prison. Then they're choosing to stay in prison longer with hopes they could figure it out. So that fear of what would await me on the other side kind of compelled me to begin this idea of, memorializing the journey. But one of my biggest regrets, I was like 6 months into my prison term when you began to help me do that. I went in April, it was October. I regret not starting sooner. So just use this old proverb, like, what was the best day was 20 years ago to plant a tree, the next best day is today. Like, you've got to start and begin to build, and then share it with everyone. I'd love for you to offer some insights, because you shared it with everyone without the expectation you would ever hear back from anyone.
Yeah, I don't care about what other people do. I care
That
about,
much I know.
am I working on doing the best that I can possibly do? And I would encourage anybody who's looking at this work to go through the course. It's a self-directed course. And in the lesson plan that accompanies this video, I'm going to put a link to the Straight A Guide course so that you can start working through it and start figuring out, what does it mean to define success? That's the first step. But that's only the first step. It doesn't get you anything. You've got to then follow through with what we teach in the 10 modules, and you have to memorialize it. That is the way your judge is going to see you, as being extraordinary and compelling. If you could truly define what success is, and not just getting out of prison and maybe somebody hiring me, but being very specific and very intentional, then you can put a plan in place. Then you can prioritize what you need to do first. Then you can develop a body of tools, tactics, and resources that will accelerate your path. You can adjust as you need to adjust, because there will be challenges that surface, and you need to create some type of a accountability metric that will demonstrate or help you assess, am I making the progress that I want to make? The world is filled with people who talk about what they're going to do, but that's not extraordinary and compelling. What's extraordinary and compelling is doing more than what anybody expects.
Well, part of that process for me and many others is when you say you're going to memorialize it, and you introduce this phrase to me, you put it out there, you tell the world what you're going to do, and you encourage them to hold you accountable. And memorializing it every single day, what really impacted my life, and so many, you don't know who eventually is going to read it. When I came home from prison and I'm on a date, and my now wife says, hey, I read a lot of what you wrote. I see you differently. And I'm like, hey, that's kind of the goal here. You see me differently than my plea agreement. I wish I'd started earlier, but that documentation really helped, even if it didn't get me off supervision early, or it changed the trajectory of my life. And I want people to, and you never know who's reading it. That's one thing that I've learned.
I can say it not only got me off of supervised release early, I didn't even have to ask for it. All the work that I did to memorialize my journey led a U.S. attorney on her own behalf to file a motion for me to get early termination of supervised release, and a federal judge signed it based on how I had memorialized all of the work, based on she believed I was extraordinary and compelling. I didn't have to tell her. I didn't have to make a case. All I had to do is create a record showing everything I had done through 9,500 days and make it transparent. That's what Prison Professor's Talent allows anybody to do.
So people sometimes they'll want, it's still hilarious, a guarantee. There's no guarantee that documenting this journey is going to influence
What do you, could you elaborate on that? No, let me ask you. When you say people are asking for a guarantee, could you help me understand that?
If I document my journey on talent, if I create this asset to try to become extraordinary and compelling, is there a guarantee it's going to lead to this outcome? And I think it's a hilarious question. I'd love to hear how you did this work when there wasn't even possibilities to get out of prison.
I'm going to tell you the story about my friend Billy. So Billy, Billy had a Southern accent, and I don't know if I can do it exactly right, but Billy, I used to tell Billy, you really should be doing this project because you're getting out in a year. And I think you should write to your probation officer like every month. Tell them what you've been doing in here and why, what you're going to do when you get out. And all of that will kind of seed the pathway for you to get a higher level of liberty. But Billy thought that wouldn't do anything. He said, I'm not going to talk to those people. They can't do anything for me. I said, Billy, that's the person that can give you home confinement. That's the person can allow you to travel. That's the person that's going to authorize you to have a job or build an entrepreneurial business or whatever. But Billy chose to not put himself out there and not build a case for himself. So Billy was no different from many of the other people who come out of prison. Contrast that with a person who is very deliberate and very intentional and describes the career he's going to build, the preparations he has made to be in that career, the support he has built around him that might advance him as a candidate for success, the way he will earn a living, the way it will allow him to meet his obligations. And you create this very clear plan. Which person has a better case? My message to anybody is, if it has better than a 0% chance of getting you a higher level of liberty, then you should take it. Because nobody can change the past, but everybody could work to influence the future. You just can't do it by accident.
So the idea for talent, well, let's talk more about talent and ways that people could add content to their profile. And I hope the editors, our team, perhaps can scroll through your profile to get a sense of what you put up there every single day. So what are some ideas that people can add to their talent profile?
So one thing I'll say, first of all, is I'm not going to take credit that I put it up there every day, because I am fortunate to have a team. What I do every day is build a record showing my commitment to excellence. What does excellence look like? And I create a body of work that can continuously grow. And I'm not ashamed to say I use artificial intelligence. I use every tool I can possibly use to memorialize the journey, to show how hard I am working to build higher levels of success. And success for me is very different for somebody going into the system. I did 26 years. I've come home and finished and got early termination of supervised release. I've made a lot of money. Now my life is about making an impact and changing the system so that people don't have to go into prison if they're better served in community confinement settings, or on home confinement, or on probation, or on a work release program. That's going to take a lot of work. So when I write every day, it's to show somebody else I'm not going to ask you to do anything I didn't do and that I'm not still doing. On the talent profile, I would argue that there's a provision for somebody to build a biography. And that biography should describe who the person is, what makes him different from anybody else. It includes a journal, and I journal every day because every day I'm trying to connect with people in prison. It includes a section for book reports, where every time I read a book, I write this book report so it's memorialized. I include that in my accountability log also on the website. And then the last piece is a release plan. Well, I'm released, but I still have plans on how I'm going to scale this message to reach 1 million people. I am still working to build testimonials. I'm still working to contribute, but none of this is about me. As you said, if you scroll through my profile, it's an example. The question is, what is your profile going to show? And the more you think about that, the more intentional you are, the more you learn how to define success, the more effective you're going to be in building a support group that can help you.
Well, I know when I was in prison, there's some things I did that would have been valuable to put on there. You use this phrase, I guess, gamifying the profile. It's like an upgrade or change recently. I'd love for you to
I'm glad that you asked. I'm glad that you asked about gamify, and I'll ask you a question very quickly. How many people would you say you helped while you were in prison?
Well, specifically over about a month period from November to December of 2008, I taught a class about kind of like investing in the stock market. A bunch of guys I would ask, what do you want to do when you go home? They wanted to learn about business, stocks, and finance. I'm like, hey, I was a broker. Let's lead a class and have some fun over a month. Maybe 30 guys in the class.
So do you remember those 30 guys, their names and what they're doing now?
I don't know. I can't say that I do, but I know they said they found
No, that's not what I meant. Do you remember them?
I don't.
Do you have a record of those 30 people?
I ran into one of them actually a year and a half ago.
So you don't, the answer is no.
The answer is no, but I ran into one.
So let's talk about that, right? If I say to gamify the system, I would have liked that when you started the class and said, my name's Justin Paperny. I'm offering this class. I'm super enthusiastic to teach you about the stock market, the S&P, PE values, volatility, whatever you're going to teach. But I'd like to ask something of you in return. I want to make sure that I'm bringing value here. So could you fill out, first of all, first day, just write a paragraph of why you're in the class. Boom, they write the paragraph, right? It gets submitted to your profile and that gets documented. And let's say we put a point on every one of those, okay? You are accumulating points. just like in a basketball game. Score the ball, hoop, there's a point, okay? If you open a profile, you get a point. If you provide an entry, you get a point. If you write a book report, you get a point. But let's just say you're an ambassador now of the program, and those 30 people, they all built a profile. You would also get a point for every one of them, and they would get a point. They got one, you got one. You got 1 point for you and 1 point for them. Your points are growing, okay? But now also, every time they publish something, they get a point, you get a point, because you're an ambassador of the program. And the idea is, let's say you can accumulate the most points. That's gamifying it. And then when I can show how many people are building points, I didn't only change my life, I changed these 30 guys' life. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at their profiles. And it's linked to their profiles. And these are people that said, I went to Justin's class intending to learn this. And then at the other end of the class, you give them another profile and say, could you now write about what you learned? And they publish it on their profile. You now have a record of the contribution that you made. But more importantly, you've accumulated points. Now, if you do your job in getting those points, they're all going to be public right on our website. And there'll be a dashboard. Who's got the most points all across the country? And you might aspire to say, I'm going to be the highest point earner on talent. Now, what do I get to do with that? I can go to make a presentation at Amazon.com and speak to a group of executives and tell about how hard these guys are working and look at their points. Look at Jim Morrison, who is in Louisiana, and look at Jose Rodriguez, who's in Oxford, and look at how hard they're working. And there's their profiles, and it allows me to get support so that we can continue to give our program away for free. And then when I go to the Bureau of Prisons and I say, look at Jose shouldn't be in prison. He should be on work release, on home confinement because he's worked so hard. Look at it becomes a tool. And that's what we are trying to do. And really thanks to White Collar Advice for providing the sponsorship for this. We continue to innovate and build and think, what can we do better?
But by creating that, you just never know who may come across it or.
Well, I would only, of course you don't know, but you should be.
That's the beauty of it. There's also hope while you're there that by building this record that evolves over time, that a year, 3, 5, I mean, even to this day, 15 years later, people will come across something that was written in 2008 and it helps me. It provides a sense of hope too, that you're actually doing the work.
You're building an asset, and that's what we want you to see. We hope that you will visit both PrisonInvestors.org and Prison Investors Talent, and don't think about us, think about you. And that's really, I think we have to close this video because we're getting pretty long.
Yeah. Also, the webinar on Tuesday, almost every webinar, we go through a specific talent profile and we share insights of what that person from prison is writing and the strategy behind it. So join us Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific.